Hello and welcome to the Holistic Psychiatrist YouTube video, where building well-being from the thought up creates miraculous healing journeys. I'm your host, Dr. Alice Lee, the Holistic Psychiatrist practicing in Lehi, Utah. Today, I'm really excited to introduce to you our guest, Dr. Debi Silber. She's the founder of PBT, that's P as in Paul, B as in Barbara, T as in Tom for Betrayal Transformation Institute, and is a holistic psychologist, a health, mindset, and personal development expert, the author of Trust Again, and is a two-time #1 international best-selling author of The Unshakable Woman and From Hardened to Healed, The Effortless Path to Release Resistance, Get Unstuck, and Create a Life You Love. Her podcast, From Betrayal to Breakthrough, is also globally ranked within the top 1.5% of podcasts. Her recent Ph.D. study on how we experience betrayal made 3 groundbreaking discoveries that changed how long it takes to heal. In addition to being on Fox, CBS, The Dr. Oz Show, TEDx twice, and more, she's an award-winning speaker and coach dedicated to helping people move past their betrayals, as well as any other blocks preventing them from the health, work, relationships, confidence, and happiness that they want most. So I'm really excited then to introduce you to Debi Silber. I'm looking forward to learning so much from you today about the issue of betrayal. And thank you so much for being here.
Oh, really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. So let's begin with understanding this whole issue about betrayal and why does it hurt? How does it have an impact on us? And what does it create? So I'm going to give the stage to you as you talk about this area.
Sure. So, betrayal is one of those things. Think about it. Well, I define it as the breaking of a spoken or unspoken rule. Every relationship has them. And the way it works is the more we trust and depend on that person, the deeper the betrayal. So, for example, a child who's completely dependent on their parent, and then the parent does something awful, that's going to have a different impact than, let's say, your best friend sharing your secret. Still a betrayal, different level of cleanup left in the wake.
Right.
But what happens is, think about it. When the person you trust the most proves untrustworthy, who do you trust? When the one you run to when other people are causing harm are the ones causing the harm, where do you go? And so it's my 30th year in business, and I don't think anybody says, oh, I think I want to study betrayal. No, you study because you have to. And I was in health and then mindset and then personal development. And then I had a really painful betrayal from my family. Thought I did everything I needed to do to heal. A few years later, it happened again. This time it was my husband. Got him out of the house, looked at the two experiences, and I thought, well, what's similar to these two? Of course, me, but what else? And I realized, boundaries were always getting crossed. I never took my needs seriously. And I'm a big believer that if nothing changes, nothing changes. So here I was, 4 kids, 6 dogs, a thriving business. And I decided, that's it. I'm going back for a Ph.D. Wow. And it was in transpersonal psychology. I wasn't sure how I was going to manage the time, how I was going to pay for it, but I just felt so compelled to do this program. And then it was time to do a study. So I studied betrayal. What holds us back? What helps us heal? And what happens to us physically, mentally, and emotionally when the people closest to us lie, cheat, and deceive? That study led to 3 groundbreaking discoveries, which changed my health, my family, my work, my life.
And wouldn't you say also the timing of betrayal is also so relevant to the way in which it can affect us profoundly? Because I would imagine, just as distance, the further away in terms of the relationship, the less impactful that betrayal might be. But the earlier those betrayals occur, I would imagine the more profound and generalized the response to those betrayals might be. So someone who have more coping strategies at the age of 20 is going to be able to handle betrayal much more easily than a child at the age of 2.
Exactly. And also what happens is when these betrayals happen in childhood, it's not that we move into relationships because they're good. They're just so similar. We get it. We understand it. It's like, oh, I know how this works.
Yeah. And I would imagine that the more helpless a person might feel in the face of betrayal, the more they try to change themselves to adapt themselves so that they can live within a dysfunctional system. And
Mhm.
then, unfortunately, when they move out of that system into a healthy system, they're taking with them all of those coping strategies that worked for one system, but now is creating problems for them in another system.
Well, and it's also really common to sabotage the healthy system because it's too unfamiliar.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, what are those three wonderful discoveries? I'm very curious. What are the
Yeah.
three
The
discoveries that you want to share?
Yeah. So originally I was studying betrayal and post-traumatic growth, and I'm sure your audience knows, but just to bring it up again. So post-traumatic growth is, if you can imagine an upside of trauma, how that trauma, death of a loved one, disease, natural disaster, leaves you with a new awareness, insight, perspective you didn't have before. Maybe you lose someone you love and you realize life is short. But I had been through death of a loved one. I'd been through disease. And I
Mhm.
was like, no, betrayal feels very different for me. I didn't want to assume that it was the same for everyone. So I asked all my study participants, if you've been through other traumas besides betrayal, does it feel different for you? Unanimously, they said,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, it's so different. And here's why.
Mhm.
Because it feels so intentional, we take it so
Oh,
personally. So the entire self is shattered. Rejection, abandonment, belonging, confidence, worthiness, trust, they're all shattered. So it didn't quite qualify as post-traumatic growth. It was, yes, you need to rebuild your life, but you also need to rebuild yourself. So I coined a new term, post-betrayal transformation. That's the
mhm.
complete and total rebuild of your life and yourself after an
Mm.
experience with betrayal. That was the first discovery.
So, do you feel like the post betrayal transformation is kind of like a subset of the bigger umbrella of post traumatic growth,
It's
but very
it
different animal?
If I were to give you an equation, it would be
Uh-huh.
post-traumatic growth plus rebuilding the self equals post-betrayal transformation.
Oh, okay. I see.
It's only that it's like, for example, if you lose someone you love, you grieve, you're sad, you mourn the loss, you don't necessarily take it personally. It's
Mhm.
that whole attack to the self that makes betrayal such a different type of trauma to heal from. Certainly not to say which are better, which are worse. They all stink, but
Mhm.
it's the whole idea of the intentionality, the way it feels,
Mm.
gives
Mhm.
it a whole different set of processes and tools and strategies needed to move through it.
Interesting. I don't think there's any human being walking on the planet who hasn't experienced betrayal. So I
Mhm.
think what you've learned from your studies uh, will benefit everyone. One of the things I've noticed for myself because of my experiences with betrayal is almost, I would call it almost like vicarious learning. In a way, I notice myself like vicariously learning from shows. Like if
Mhm.
I'm watching a show and I notice a, an experience of betrayal and I notice how it affects someone else, it's almost like, in a way, I don't feel alone and I'm relating to how the other person might feel, noticing how they respond, and I'm trying to grow from it. It's almost like um, reading a book, when you're trying to gather information so that you can have better, more kind of a peaceful resolution of the betrayal. But again, show me or share with us what are the three discoveries that you made.
Yeah. And that was exactly why I wrote the book Trust Again, because first
Uh-huh.
of all, at a time where you need support the most, we're the
Mhm.
least likely to seek it. and
Mhm.
and it was just, the three discoveries were just too big to keep to myself. And I just wanted to
Mhm.
make sure that even if someone if they thought they were crazy, they're
Mhm.
alone and they can't find the support they need, oh yes they can. It's a great start is in the book. Anyway,
Mhm.
the second discovery was there's actually a collection of symptoms, physical, mental, and emotional, so
Mhm.
common to betrayal, it's known as post-betrayal syndrome.
Okay.
And we've had, at this point, probably about 60,000 people who've taken our post-betrayal syndrome quiz to see to what extent they're struggling. A few things
Wow.
about that. The
Okay.
first thing is, we've all been taught time heals all wounds, and I have the proof. When it comes to betrayal, that's simply not true.
Wow.
There's a question on the quiz that says, is there anything else you'd like to share? And
Mhm.
people write things like, my betrayal happened 40 years ago. I can still feel the hate. My betrayal happened 35 years ago. I'm unwilling to trust again. My betrayal happened 10 years ago. Feels like it happened yesterday. So we know if we're counting on time to heal it, that's not going to do it. And I mean, we can spot an unhealed betrayal a mile away, and I'm happy to talk about what that looks like too. But every few months, I pull the stats from the quiz to see where people land. Would you like me to share some?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So now imagine out of 60,000 people, men, women, every age group is represented, just about every country. 78% constantly revisit their experience. 81% feel a loss of personal power. 94% deal with painful triggers. And those triggers you write down, 94%. The most common, physical symptoms, 71% have low energy, 68% have sleep issues, 63% have extreme fatigue. That's how you know your adrenals have crashed. You wake up, you're exhausted, you can go right back to sleep. 47% have weight changes. So in the beginning, it's really likely you can't hold food down. Later on, you're using food for comfort. 45% have digestive issues. That could be anything from Crohn's, IBS, diverticulitis, constipation, diarrhea, you name it. The most common mental symptoms, 78% are overwhelmed, 70% are walking around in a state of disbelief, 68% are unable to focus, 64% are in shock, 62% can't concentrate. So imagine you can't concentrate, you're exhausted, you have a gut issue, you still have to work, you have to raise your kids. That's not even the emotional issues.
Now, some of these questions, were they shortly after the betrayal, or are they varying in terms of how long ago?
This is the craziest part of all of it, and I want to share the rest of them. But these statistics could be from a betrayal that happened decades ago.
I see.
So that's, and when I get through the third stage, you'll see the third discovery, you'll see exactly how that happens.
Okay.
But imagine, so here, and these are statistics, not like 20%, 30%. These are high numbers from something that happened decades ago.
Kind of entrenched.
Absolutely. So just to finish them out here, emotionally, 88% experience extreme sadness, 83% are very angry. And you know how common it is to bounce back and forth between those two emotions. 82% feel hurt, 80% have anxiety, 79% are stressed, just a few more. 84% have an inability to trust. 67% prevent themselves from forming deep relationships because they were afraid of being hurt again. 82% find it hard to move forward. 90% want to move forward, but they don't know how.
Wow, I believe that. I mean, I think the triggers, the protective shells that people put up, all of them are just, it's almost like a generalization of that experience to prevent them from getting hurt again.
Well, that's one of the ways we see it in an unhealed betrayal. So I'll see it in health, in work, in relationships. For example, in relationships, I'll see it in one of two ways. The first way is in a repeat betrayal. The faces change, but it's the same thing. And people say, what the heck? I'm going from boss to boss to boss, friend to friend to friend, partner to partner to partner. Is it me? Yes, it is. Not in that it's your fault, in that it's your opportunity. There's a profound lesson. Something needs to be learned there. Maybe you are lovable, worthy, and deserving. You need better boundaries in place. Whatever it is, until and unless you get that, you will have opportunities in the form of people to teach you. Right. The other way is the big wall goes up. Been there, done that. No one's getting near me again. And we think that's coming from a place of strength. No, it's not. It's coming from fear. Yes. We see it in, we see it in health too. People go to the most well-meaning doctors, coaches, healers, therapists to manage a stress-related symptom, illness, condition, disease. At the root of it, very often it's an unhealed betrayal.
And I guess that would suggest that when people are going to their doctors for physical ailments, to really think about, and for the doctor to ask about betrayals and stressors that happened in their lives, because a lot of doctors, internists, family physicians really don't connect the dots between the physical body and the emotional reaction to betrayal.
You're so right. And that was one of the biggest reasons why we started our certification program, because, think about like the example I gave, 45% of everyone with a gut issue has, experienced betrayal. So anybody who's been through betrayal, 45% have a gut issue. So now think about it. They go to the most well-meaning, amazing gut expert. But if that
Right.
gut expert doesn't understand betrayal is at the root of it, they're hacking away at the leaves. They can only get to a certain amount of healing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is really, that leads me perfectly into the third discovery.
Okay.
This for me was the most exciting. And what
Okay.
we learned was, while we can stay stuck for years, decades, a lifetime, and so many people do, if we're going to fully heal, and by fully heal, I mean symptoms of post-betrayal syndrome to that whole healed state of post-betrayal transformation, the rebuilding of your life and yourself, we're going to move through 5 now proven predictable stages.
Okay.
And what's even more exciting about that is we now know what happens physically, mentally, and emotionally at every one of those stages. And we know what it takes to move from one stage to the next. So healing is entirely predictable. I'm happy to share the stages if that would serve.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Okay. Totally mapped out in trust. Again, it's what we teach within the PBT Institute. It's what our coaches are all certified in. But so imagine, here's a distilled version of it right here. So stage 1 is like a setup stage. And I saw this with every study participant, me too. If you can imagine 4 legs of a table, the 4 legs being physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. What I saw with everyone was a real heavy lean on the physical and the mental, thinking and doing, right? And not really prioritizing the emotional and the spiritual, feeling and being. That's not to say if you are busy thinking and doing, you will be betrayed. It was just a typical profile I saw. But if you only have a table with 2 legs, easy for that table to topple over. That's us. Stage 2. By far the scariest of all of the stages. And this is shock, trauma, D-Day, discovery day. And it's the breakdown of the body, mind, and the worldview. Right here, you've ignited the stress response. You're headed for every single stress-related symptom, illness, condition, disease. Your mind is in a complete and total state of chaos and overwhelm. You can't wrap your mind around what you just learned. This makes no sense. And your worldview has just been shattered. Your worldview is your mental model, the rules that govern us that prevent chaos. Don't go there, trust this person. This is how life works. And in one earth-shattering moment, series of moments, everything you've known to be real and true is no longer. The bottom is bottomed out, and a new bottom hasn't been formed yet. I mean, so it's terrifying. But think about it. If the bottom were to bottom out on you, what would you do? You'd grab hold of whatever you could to stay safe and stay alive. And that's stage 3. Survival instincts emerge. It's the most practical out of all of the stages. If you can't help me, get out of my way. How do I survive this experience? Where do I go? Who can I trust? How do I feed my kids? Here's the trap though. Stage 3 is by far, hands down, the most common place to get stuck. And here's why. Once we've figured out how to survive our experience, because it feels so much better than the shock and trauma of where we just came from, we're like, whew, okay, all right, I got this.
You get, right? This is where I stay. I'm not moving.
Well, that's it, exactly. And because we don't know there's anywhere else to go, transformation doesn't even begin until stage 4. But because we don't know there's anywhere else to go, we start planting roots here.
Right.
We're not supposed to, but we don't know that. And 4 things happen.
Right.
The first thing is we get all those small self benefits. We get to be right. We get someone to blame. We get a target for our anger. We get sympathy from everyone we tell our story to. We don't have to do the hard work of learning to trust again. Should I trust you? Can I trust you? I forget it. I'm not trusting anybody. So we plant right? And so we plant deeper roots. We're not supposed to, but we don't know that. And now because we're here longer than we should be, the mind starts doing things like, well, maybe you're not all that great. Maybe you deserved it. Maybe this, maybe that. So we plant deeper roots now because this is where we are. And these are the thoughts we have. This is what we're putting out there. So like energy attracts like energy. So now we start calling situations and circumstances and relationships towards us to confirm, yup, this is where we belong. The misery loves company crowd. They come around now too. It gets worse, but I'll get you out of here.
Well, I was thinking as you're talking here that in the most vulnerable, especially some of the clients or patients that I've worked with who had significant abuse, obviously abuse is a betrayal of children, they do end up with dissociation and they can't even there's no place to escape. They're in the family. So they stuff it all in a closet psychologically, and they're not able to deal with it. If they
Yeah.
do it enough, of course, they have a split sense of self. And those individuals, I remember one particular patient who had been sexually abused by her father from a young age repeatedly, and she did dissociate quite a lot. And she told me about how she would get anxious at night, because at night is when the abuse happened. So she told me in one session, I'll never forget, she said, so I left the house in the middle of the night, and I was walking down the street, and somebody stopped to pick me up, and then I was abused, because she's so dissociated. And I said, okay, walk me through this experience that you had where you got sexually abused. And she goes, well, it was a stranger, and he stopped to pick me up. And I said, you got into a car in the middle of the night with a stranger? And she goes, yeah. And then I said, then what happened? And she said, well, he drove me to, instead of driving me home, he drove me to this deserted area. I said, and did you notice, well, did you experience danger at that point? And she was like, no, I didn't really have a response. I was kind of numb or whatever. So each of the steps where you would like have red flags and alarms, she was already so numbed from the dissociation, the blocking, and that she didn't actually experience the actual betrayal and alarm until after the event, after she was raped. And then she would then say, well, I don't understand how that could have happened to me. So this recreation, I think, happen when it's happening at a very young age, leaves people without the coping strategies because they've left themselves behind. They completely forget those experiences.
You're so right. And it's, betrayal trauma is really, as a child, it's a survival. I mean, we're talking about survival here. And so in that child's mind, the way to survive the experience is to escape it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do see that.
Yeah, it's so grateful there are people out there just like you who can help. So it, and continuing with the stages,
right,
as if that stage 3 doesn't keep you stuck enough, and that being dissociative is an absolute way you will stay in stage 2 and 3. You'll bounce back and forth between the two.
Right.
But then think about it. If this is where you are and you're so miserable here, but you don't know there's anywhere else to go, right here, you resign yourself. You're like, this stinks, but I better find a way to be okay with it. So here's where you start using food, drugs, alcohol, work, TV, keeping busy, anything to numb, avoid, and distract yourself from what's so painful to feel or face. So think about it. You do it for a day, a week, a month. Now it's a habit, a year, 10 years, 20 years. And I can see someone 20 years out and say, that emotional eating you're doing, or that drinking you're doing, or that numbing in front of the TV, do you think that has anything to do with your betrayal? And they would look at me like I'm crazy. They would say, but it happened 20 years ago. But all they did was put themselves in stage 3 and stay there. You see? So that's why stage 3 is so common and the hardest to leave, because we fall in there and that's where we stay. So much so that actually From Hardened to Healed, my most recent book, is only about stage 3. Trust again has the 5 stages, but I noticed everyone is getting stuck in stage 3. That's where, we live. And I look at it thinking, you've been through the worst of it already. You owe it to yourself to move through stages 4 and stage 5. Anyway, if you are willing to let go of the small self benefits and everything that goes along with it, grief, mourn the loss, bunch of things you need to do, you move to stage 4. Stage 4 is finding and adjusting to a new normal. So here's where you acknowledge, I can't undo my experience, but I control what I do with it. And I always use the example of, if you've ever moved to a new house, office, condo, apartment, whatever, all your stuff's not there, it's not quite cozy yet, but it's going to be okay. And when you make that mental decision, you start turning down the stress response. You're not healing just yet, but at least you stop the massive damage you were causing in stages 2 and stage 3. What's interesting also about stage 4 is, if you were to move, you don't necessarily take everything with you. And what I found was, If your friends weren't there for you, right here, you've outgrown them. And I see this all the time. Someone says, what the heck? I've had these friends 10, 20, 30 years. Is it me? Yes, it is. You're undergoing a transformation. And if they don't rise, they don't come. You don't have the patience for it anymore. You're recreating this new version of you based on a very different set of rules. When you're in this stage 4, you're making it cozy, you're making it mentally home. You move into the 5th most beautiful stage, and this is healing, rebirth, and a new worldview. The body starts to heal, self-love, self-care, eating well, exercising, things like that. You didn't have the bandwidth for that earlier. Now you do. Your mind starts to heal. You're making new rules, new boundaries based on the road you just traveled. And you have a new worldview based on all you see so clearly now. And the 4 legs of the table, in the beginning, it was all about the physical and the mental. By this point, we're solidly grounded because we're focused on the emotional and the spiritual too. Those are the 5 stages.
Wonderful. And in terms of helping people go from one stage to the other, I know for me as a holistic psychiatrist, I rely a lot on the energy medicine techniques that I've learned. I learned about energy medicine starting with emotional freedom technique, and then I moved on to logosynthesis. And right now I'm using a lot of intentional statements, using our connection to what I call life energy to kind of shift those things at the subconscious level. And I demonstrate it to my patients in terms of the shift, in terms of the energy through what I call energy testing or muscle testing. So all of those are tools that I've used, and it's shown that it's been effective in my patients. But tell me what tools you use.
Yeah, we found that everybody has their own kind of recipe, but what we know for sure is because betrayal affects every level, it must be healed on every level. So it needs to be healed physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And what many people do is they say, okay, well, I'll just go to a therapist. Well, first of all,
talk about it.
Talk about it. I mean, that's nice on some level, but the issues are in the tissues. We have to get this out, right? There's also the right type of support is crucial, because anybody who's been betrayed, you feel like you're crazy. You think you're crazy, you're alone. There's no one else who's been through this. And can you ever get over it? You know, so it takes a combination of working on healing on every level.
Wow, I love that answer.
Yeah, along with the right type of support. But I have found it's somatic, the body-based practices are, so, I mean, there are so many, you know, and that's where it's very different. Some people love EFT, some people love Reiki, some EMDR, some, you know, so we found as long as you're including that in your practice in a way that really works for you, along with all of the other you know, all of the other aspects, that's what, you know, that's what moves you from one stage to the next.
Yeah. And it's not completely useless to talk about things in therapy. I feel like people who've done that at least can identify, you know, what's been going on, and at least had a chance to, you know, have a chance to kind of emote and share it with someone else who's compassionate. But I think the bottom line is, it's not about describing the scar, knowing how big it is, how it came about. You actually have to heal that scar. And that's where I feel some of the other tools are very, very useful.
I love that you're bringing that up, because it's really, you're so right. It's wonderful, especially early on, just to express it and talk about it. Yes. But first of all, we have a lot of people coming into the PBT Institute with therapy trauma. If that counselor therapist isn't highly skilled in betrayal, it does more harm than good.
Because they're trusted.
Well, that's it. They're trusted. That person takes advantage of their position of power, or they just don't understand it. Like, here's an example. We see this all the time. Let's say there's a couple. I'll just take let's say the husband is a narcissist and the wife is betrayed. She manages to drag them to couples counseling. This therapist isn't highly skilled in betrayal. And she looks at the person who's been betrayed, the wife, and says, oh my gosh, you know, if you just learned how to really, you know, listen more, communicate better or something. And she's thinking, what? And because he's very charismatic, crocodile tears, you know, and so she's, as if it wasn't crazy enough, now she's almost getting blamed for it. So it's so hard for so many people, because and the study, even I saw this a lot too. It's very common even to protect the betrayer. to our own detriment, because that person is widely loved or respected, or we're so embarrassed and ashamed. So there are so many reasons why we do this, and we suffer and struggle in silence. I mean, it's so common.
And I think it's for other people's comfort and for their sense of, I guess, worldview to stay the same. If they weren't looking at someone as this evil being who, really doesn't truly care about anyone, because to be betrayed by someone, you have to look at that really ugly side of people that says they actually don't have the same, like, we want to think the best of people, and to really acknowledge that this betrayal has happened because of another person's purposeful choices is a really painful thing, even for a therapist to go there.
I will tell you though, and I've seen this, betrayal will show you who someone is. It also, it allows someone to, it also wakes them up to who they've temporarily become. When that's the experience, you still could just walk away and that's it. But there is tremendous potential in healing when that's the case. And just to
For the person who betrays?
The person who betrays. Yeah.
Okay.
And that was the case in my own experience, where rebuilding is always a choice, whether you rebuild yourself and move on. That's what I did with my family. It wasn't an option to rebuild with them. Or if the situation lends itself, if you're willing, if you want to, you rebuild something from the ground up new with the person who hurt you. And that's what I did with my husband. Not long ago, as two completely transformed people, we actually married each other again. New rings, new vows, new dress, and our 4 kids as our bridal party. Never in a billion years would I have done anything like that if I wasn't totally different, and for sure if he wasn't completely different either. But like I said, it for him, it was the absolute biggest wake-up call, because he lost all of us. He lost his entire family. And that's a bit, and I guess he was the one who told our kids. So I imagine there was something, to sitting your 4 kids down and they're looking at you. You did what to mom? If anything is going to have you fall from grace and realize what matters, it's losing everything that matters, And so there's potential. I mean, there's huge wake up call on that side, as it is for the person who's been betrayed too. Now, that's not to say you need to do anything with that either. You can completely just heal yourself and move on. But what I see so often is people are so afraid of that crash and burn. And so they never fully heal. That was the end. I was like, okay, that was the deal breaker. That was it. But what happens is, that's when you really start creating this new version of yourself that never would have had the opportunity to show up had that not happened.
Well, I think what you said about the adrenals are all about fight or flight. And the flight part is avoidance. And when someone's avoiding any kind of situation where they could experience their trust being shattered again, then the most logical choice is not to have relationships where trust can be broken. And I think a lot of people then tend to avoid making deeper friendships because of that.
They do, but that's not fair to you. It's like you get burned on the stove and you swear off cooking. Right? If you love to cook, you need to learn how to just approach the stove carefully, and you absolutely can. That's the opportunity. And I'm certainly not saying it's easy. I was in ICU for 11 days and I've lost loved ones. Nothing was harder for me than healing from that betrayal, especially because I'm a highly sensitive empath, and integrity is my absolute highest value.
I totally agree. I understand.
Yeah. So when you look at like, who is the absolute worst person to betray, it would be someone like me. But then, you think, okay, there's got to be a reason for this. I mean, the most important people in my life all betrayed me. And I had a very powerful story
Mhm.
And if I shared it with anybody, I would get all kinds of sympathy. But
Uh-huh.
instead,
Mhm.
if you do something really good with something really painful, I don't know, I look at it as trauma well served.
I love you. I think that that's wonderful. I think that's how we can re-engage with that divine creative self within us that says, life can happen. We're not saying it's a blessing, but we can respond to it with even greater strength and awaken that part of us that can create something good out of those lemons.
Well, that's it. Because I mean, I didn't do anything anybody else couldn't do. But I remember
Mhm.
going through the study and just implementing what the study was proving works and not
Mhm.
doing what they said didn't work. And I remember thinking to myself, if I can heal from this, I'm taking everyone with me. And
Mhm.
I think that was probably the reason why I didn't stay stuck for very long, because here was a roadmap being created, the stages, and I was just using myself as the case study,
Mhm.
and it
Mhm.
was working. And then
Right.
it was like, okay, well, if this works for me, who else could this work for?
Well, I wanted to go back to some of the things that you mentioned as coping strategies for betrayal, that stage 3 part.
Mhm. Yeah.
And one of the things that you mentioned is how we try to escape from
Mhm.
ourselves through television, through being too busy to really think things through. And it brought up some thoughts about addictions in general. Like we have a very narrow definition of what addiction is, but I do feel that there's been enough trauma in people's lives that they just have different forms of addictions,
Mhm.
and it
Mhm.
comes out in different ways. Some people might be addicted to their work. Other people might be addicted to reading, which mothers or fathers will say, "Oh, that's such a good kid." Their nose is always in a book, but
Mhm.
it's still an escape, and people
Mhm.
don't realize that. So,
Right.
can you talk a little bit about addictions and betrayal?
Yeah, it is so common. Uh,
Mhm.
there is such a huge link between
Mhm.
addiction and betrayal, and you're absolutely right. When we're using anything to numb, avoid, distract ourselves from something, that's the problem. That's the issue right there. And so here are 4 questions that I invite everybody to write down. That's my way of saying write these down.
Mhm.
And it's the first one is, am I numbing, avoiding, distracting? If so, how? Call yourself on it. Like, do you walk into a kitchen, your kitchen, you're not the least bit hungry, and you're in the cabinets? Do you walk into a room, you put the TV on just to drown out the sound of your own thoughts, right?
Mhm.
The second question, what am I pretending not to see? Am I pretending not to see there's trouble in my relationship? Am I pretending not to see I hate my job? Am I pretending not to see that health issue that needs my attention? The third question, what's life going to look like in 5 to 10 years if I do nothing? We don't
Mm.
want to look at that, but take that same behavior that we're looking to numb, avoid, and distract, play it out over 5 to 10 years. What does that look like? How does that affect your health, your work, your relationships? And the fourth question, what could life look like in 5 to 10 years if I changed now? I'm not saying it's
Mhm.
easy. Transformation begins when you tell yourself the truth.
Mhm. Yeah. Those are wonderful questions. And I think that as we heal from betrayal, um, one of the things that I know to be true is that it's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of compassion for ourselves. And it can be a little tricky because one of the things I was thinking about is how healers and professionals, they spend so much energy serving others that it's a little bit like the cleaner who goes and cleans everybody's houses, but their own house is a mess, right? And I think that it's a little bit tricky for people who are service oriented, such as you
Mhm,
and I,
mhm,
because we're out there trying to help everybody else clean up their lives,
mhm,
but we are numbing ourselves at
mhm.
the end of the day with, whatever the distractions are, and not really taking time to really heal ourselves. We can't just always be healing others. We have to take time to heal ourselves.
You're still right. I actually have a different take on it. And
Okay.
and it's this. And this was from a million years ago when I was a personal trainer.
Mhm.
There were days I didn't want to work out, but I knew I had to face everybody. And it kind of forced me to get that workout in. And I'll tell you, that is like a little secret hack for so many of our coaches and practitioners. It
Mm,
forces them to do the work because they're showing up representing the work. That's not
mm,
saying they're still not triggered or whatever,
mhm, mhm,
but they're doing the work because then they can show up clean. You know, they can,
mm,
they're honest. They're doing the work. You know, it's the same trigger that may take them down a slippery slope. They
mhm,
know, they're seeing our members, they're seeing, clients and patients. They can't afford that. So it keeps them honest. And
mm,
I hear this from probably most of our coaches.
mhm.
It's an amazing way to keep them on track.
That's a really positive way to look at it. And I agree too with all the work that I've done to help other people. I feel like I've accidentally, in the same process, grown along with them. And it's been a real blessing for me to be able to have the kind of work where I can grow and develop psychologically and emotionally. Although I do sometimes envy those people who have work that allows them to get up and walk around more because I'm sitting in a chair all the time.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you for sure is how can we learn to trust again?
Mm.
Because trust is one of the things that I think once broken, I think it's very difficult to heal. So
Yeah.
how did you find yourself being able to do that?
Yeah. And that's why I wrote the book Trust Again.
Mhm.
People ask me all the time, can trust be repaired? I say no. Can it be
Okay.
rebuilt? Yes. But it takes a
Okay.
tremendous amount of work. And I
Okay.
look at trust like a brick wall,
Okay.
where every opportunity someone has to show
Mhm.
that they're trustworthy represents one brick, right? And the only way
Okay.
I know of a brick wall to be built is brick by brick by brick. So it can take a lot of time. And now
Okay.
imagine the person who painstakingly built that brick wall in one earth-shattering moment just destroys the whole thing, right? Well, you
Mhm.
you have every right to look at the rubble of bricks and say, I don't have the least bit of interest in watching that thing get rebuilt. Totally fine. You walk away.
I
However,
see.
if the intention is
Mhm.
to rebuild trust, let's say with that person, your
Mhm.
job then would be you need to be willing to watch the brick wall be rebuilt. And that person has to be a really good bricklayer. And it goes up the same way.
Mhm.
Went up the first time. Every opportunity they have to show that they're trustworthy, one brick in that brick wall.
I see.
So it takes a long
Yeah.
time. And when we rush to trust, it backfires because the foundation isn't built. Trust is foundational. And we
Mm.
can't neglect the all of the stages that go before that, giving back that trust to that other person. Because think
Wow.
about what happens. It's so basic in when trust is shattered. We certainly don't trust the person who betrayed us, and then we don't trust ourselves. We think, well, I'm a bright person. How did I not see? How did I not know? So if you don't trust the person you trusted the most, and you don't trust yourself, well, then how in the world can you trust in anyone or anything? That's the
Mm.
ripple effect. So it all needs to be completely rebuilt.
Interesting. Yeah, that's food for thought for sure. I was thinking about an experience that I had where um, it was something that happened with my mother. And what happened was uh, I had an experience that I knew to be abusive in my childhood growing up, different experiences. And my parents never acknowledged that. They never really felt like what my experience was could be legitimized, right? So, it ended up in this one experience where my mother actually was calling some of my relatives to try to to kind of make them believe that I was not like in my right mind. And that's why I would choose this avoidance. So it was during a divorce situation where my ex-husband, or at the time we were still married, but my ex-husband wanted my children to revisit my parents, and my parents have a history of abuse. And so I didn't want them to go back and visit them. And my mother heard about that. And so she went around calling my relatives to tell them, because my attorney wanted me to call my relatives and get their support in terms of that choice.
Mhm.
And so she went around and called different people to try to discredit me. And then what happened was that my relatives knew that my perspective was accurate. And so they actually supported and affirmed my perspective,
Mhm.
despite my mother's effort to discredit me.
Mhm.
So that was the very first time in my life, this was in my 40s, where I actually had somebody legitimize my reality
Yeah.
and affirm that they believed me, because they knew what my parents were like, and they knew who I was. And so
Yeah.
they kind of provided some feedback to my mom saying, if Alice said that, then we believe her. And, given your history, there's plenty of evidence that that's so.
Mhm.
So the reason why I even bring this up, because it's a very personal experience, is because at the moment that my reality was for the very first time legitimized by someone else,
Mhm.
I realized that most of my life up to that point, I questioned myself and my reality, like I was crazy or something.
Mhm.
Because as a child, you know what happened, but then it's not being legitimized by those you trust.
Right.
So instead of thinking of it as a betrayal, I internalize it like maybe I'm somehow delusional and don't have a sense
That
of reality.
And it's so normal because think about it. Here are these big people. You're like, they must know better. Okay, maybe it's true. I guess I am crazy. I grew up the same exact way.
Oh,
And
okay.
so, and I remember the moment, it was so shocking to me that
Hmm.
I remember exactly where I was the moment I thought, what if it's not me? I mean, that's how shocking it was.
Exactly.
And I don't know what had me do this, but I remember saying, just keep thinking that. And then it turned into, I don't think it's me. Again, shocking, terrifying. And
Hmm.
I just kept thinking it. And then it turned into, I think it's them.
Yeah.
And then you could see almost like how I'm extracting myself from and then I remember when it turned into, oh my gosh, it's them. And the
Yes.
freedom and the liberation, but you get it. Yeah,
I
because
get it. I
we
get
just
it.
think it's got to be us. No, it's not. We're just the only one who could take the blame. That's all.
Exactly. The vulnerable child.
Yep.
I had about 15 years in which I didn't talk to my parents. And I moved back to Utah, and I thought my brother was really into let's make it a whole family, let's get everybody together. So we got together for Thanksgiving after 15 years of separation. And that first opportunity to get together, my father did something. And okay, I'll just go into it so people don't know, what did he do? Okay, so he came around. Okay, he came around, and in front of everyone, everybody was in a group. We were kind of all standing around the kitchen island in my home. And surreptitiously, he puts his hand around my waist, pinches me right there to kind of feel the fat around there, and laughs and chuckles. He thinks that it was so funny. And it was just all done kind of in a really quiet way, so nobody else noticed. And this is like, to me, it was like introduction to what you're going to be getting more of,
Yeah.
if you want to continue this relationship. That and a few other, like red flags came up where, instead of just a nice casual hug, this is 15 years of estrangement. He puts his cheek next to mine and just kind of like this, like overly uncomfortable, this closeness, physical closeness, and holds me next to him like for a very long time. That again, very uncomfortable. And all of these things happened, and it took a while for me to process it. But then this time I talked about it to people that supported me instead of the child who was isolated and alone. And then my brother and I actually went back to my father later. I had a vacation and I had to come back, and then we went to talk to my father and my mom, and we sat down and we talked about it, and we confronted him. As an adult psychiatrist, I revisited this issue that I've had to deal with my whole life growing up. And You know, what was really interesting about that experience was from an adult perspective, now with all of these skills going forward, I sat there and I saw him provide excuse after excuse, coping strategy after coping strategy to try to push away the responsibility, to make himself the victim, to do all of these tricks. And it was like a knee-jerk reaction. He was so versed in it. I was like astounded by the way in which this 90-year-old man has avoided learning all of these years and finally is confronted by his adult daughter about an issue that he had had plenty of opportunities to work on. And for the first time, I was able to see this is not my problem. This is
Mm,
somebody else's who has not
exactly.
worked on it, and
Mhm.
marveled at the way in which he dodged it in
It's
front
such
of
a
me.
wasted opportunity, isn't it? I mean, and I remember it
Mhm.
really struck me. I've always had a lot of dogs. And I
Uh-huh,
remember when I was working through my family betrayal, and it was
uh-huh,
just, I mean, experience after experience, just so bizarre where you question yourself and you're like, it's not me, it's them. Okay.
okay.
And I remember one day looking at my dogs saying, it's interesting because I wouldn't expect them to be anything other than dogs. That's what they are. Why am I expecting anything different than what I've always seen? For
Mm,
whatever reason at this time and place in their current level of consciousness, this is all they're able and willing to do. So it's really for
mhm,
me to just move on and understand, because if I'm trying
right,
to prove and convince and teach and everything
right,
else, it's just making me sick.
right. And I think that it's gracious and compassionate for us to give people who have betrayed us an opportunity to make it into to fix it, to kind of make it better. But when you notice that it's just giving them more opportunities to perpetuate a pattern that they're used to, then one must step away from that and not allow that to happen.
For your
And,
own health and sanity.
and as you say, the wall has to, I mean, you were ready to allow them to put those bricks back on the wall. But
Mhm.
if the first thing they do is knock more bricks down, you know that they're not ready
Yeah,
to do the healing work that needs to happen.
exactly. Exactly. And
Mhm.
it's really for us to see that so we don't start building the brick wall for them, which many people
Mm.
do, right?
Oh, yeah, that was another thing. My father wanted me to be his psychiatrist and heal him.
Yeah.
That would have been me building bricks for him, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
So it sounds like you see it very clearly.
yeah. Well, as we, conclude our video, share with me any last messages that you think that we should come away with at this point that can, help us to kind of take the first steps in the right direction.
Yeah, I would say, well, clearly I've been there. I understand the pain, and I
Mhm.
know how painful it is, and I know all the reasons to stay stuck, but it feels so good when you move through the stages, and that's the opportunity, and it really lends itself to creating an entirely new identity. You leave behind everything that no longer serves. You take what you love, and you build a version of you that never would have had the opportunity to be built had that not happened. And
Perfect.
that's
Yeah.
the opportunity. And I just really
Mhm.
recommend it for everybody.
Wow, I love that. Thank you so much for all that you've taught us and your wisdom that you've shared. And I'm
Thank you.
really glad that our listeners have stayed with us and was able to hear your advice. I think that's wonderful. So, Dr. Silber, would you like to give anyone some links or things that they can go to for information?
Sure. So the best thing to do is really take the post betrayal syndrome quiz to see to what extent you're struggling. And you could just find
Mhm.
that at the PBT, as in post betrayal transformation, the pbtinstitute.com/quiz.
Okay, wonderful. Any other links that you would like them to visit to learn more about you and your practice?
Sure. They can actually go to the PBT Institute and find everything. You'll find the other quizzes, our supplement line, our membership programs, books, all of it.
Wonderful. And your X talk is there as
Both
well?
of our, both of the TED Talks. Yeah. The one that would be most relevant would
Mhm.
be, do you have post-betrayal syndrome?
Okay, wonderful. I think that that talk was really interesting to me as well. Thank you so much for that. I
Thank you.
appreciate you giving me those links. For those out there who are listening, if you've enjoyed today's content, please subscribe to this weekly podcast for more informative insights on holistic psychiatry. Also, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to my weekly updates on my website, holisticspsychiatrist.com, for more wonderful stories and developments from my holistic practice, and where you'll find links to all my social media platforms. Until next time, let's keep building our well-being from the thought up, and have a wonderful, joyful week. I look forward to having you join us next week, and I hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.